When someone carries out an attack on a school, it's usually assumed that they're not going to live to tell the tale. Sometimes they do stick around, but they're subject to some very harsh sentencing. However, today we have the story of a young boy who faced arguably little to no consequences. The majority of mass shooters tend to die in their attacks, and for the very few that do live on, they usually get no less than life in prison. Very, very rarely they'll get sent to something like a mental institution, but it's usually under the condition that they'll probably never get out. It's very rare that a mass shooter faces almost none of that, and that the police's hands are basically tied. Today is the story of a boy named Kosta Kecmanovic. He came from a prominent, well-off family in Belgrade in Serbia. His father, Vladimir, was a well-known and wealthy radiologist. Meanwhile, his mother, Miljana, was an assistant professor of microbiology at the University of Belgrade. When it came to how strict his family was, Kosta said that his house didn't really have any special rules in particular. He said that he would have his phone taken away from time to time, but nothing more extreme than that. However, he has also stated that his mom was very demanding when it came to his schoolwork, expecting him to be the best in every single subject he tried, often acting disappointed in him if he was anything less than flawless. His parents expected that he and his sister be friendly to everyone around them and fairly well cultured. Still, he said that he had a good relationship with his father and that his mother was kind, compassionate, intelligent, and fair. His parents got along well, as did he and his sister. At some point in his childhood, Kosta's father took him to a shooting range. There, an instructor let him hold his first gun. At the shooting range, it was usually his father who taught him how to load the gun, change magazines, and actually shoot it. This gained Kosta a lot of approval from his father, who he said admired his ability to shoot accurately. Back at home, Kosta's father also secured their gun. He had put the gun into a gun safe with a 3-digit passcode. There was even a device with a passcode on the gun's trigger inside the safe. At school, Kosta seemed to do decently well. He had friends, performed well academically, and even played on the basketball team. However, it is rumored that he was bullied a bit in one class, although it hasn't been confirmed and has been doubted as well. Regardless of what really happened, we do know that his parents decided to take him out of his class and put him into another. In this new class, he seemed to get along reasonably well with the other students, although he was quiet. Other students in his class described him, saying, "He was quiet and a good pupil. He recently joined our class." Another said, "He was having good grades, but we didn't know much about him. He was not so open with everybody." While he was still in elementary school, Kosta decided to go down a very dark path, and frustratingly, he has offered very little insight as to why that actually was. While he was rumored to have been bullied, he didn't make that claim himself. He instead said that he liked playing the game Valorant, and when he watched a movie that mentioned mass murder, he thought about carrying out a similar plan himself. It's notable that he said the movie only mentioned mass murder, and not even that it accurately portrayed it, meaning that it doesn't seem to have taken much of a push to send Kosta spiraling. Throughout the month of April 2023, Kosta got to planning. He began to draw different maps of the classrooms and layout of his school. He put together a hit list of the students he wanted to kill, failing to provide a reason as to why he wanted to kill them in the first place. Kosta's school, the Vladislav Ribnikar Model Elementary School, was a public elementary school in the Vračar area of Belgrade, a fairly affluent urban area. The history of the school, or at least the previous iterations of it, went back to the 1700s. It was a school with about 1,000 students that was focused on French language education. 50% of the school curriculum was taught in French only, in fact. The school has gotten quite a high level of recognition over the years, coming to be seen by some as a school for the children of elites. For a long time, Kosta had focused on how to get the guns out of his father's gun safe. While he was unable to get into it, he looked up how to obtain firearms himself. Given that he was only 13 at this point in the story, that was going to be nearly impossible. Even if he could find an adult willing to buy a gun for someone underage, doing so for someone who was only 13 would be out of the question for most people. Instead, he decided to focus more on the gun safe again. After a long struggle with trial and error, he eventually cracked the codes and got inside. Kosta got to work preparing some crude homemade bombs in his home, stashing them away for his upcoming killing spree. He took the guns out of his father's gun safe and hid them under his own bed, waiting for the time to strike. It was now May 1st, 2023, and he felt that he would be ready to go any time now. Kosta woke up on the morning of May 3rd, ready and willing to commit the massacre he had been planning for about a month. He pulled out his father's two guns, a 9mm CZ-75 Shadow II and a .22 LR Ruger Mk3 Standard, along with two homemade bombs he had made out of gasoline. He then grabbed his hit list so he wouldn't forget any of his targets. For reasons that we can only speculate, on his way out of his family's apartment that morning, he decided to carve a small phrase into the door. The phrase translated to, "Costa, you naive cuckold, we're waiting for you." It still isn't known what he meant by this phrase. He may have been trying to make it appear as if someone else was carrying out the attack. He may have wanted it to appear that someone had bullied him or threatened him that morning. The most likely reasoning seems to be that he wanted to appear mentally unstable. In the end, it isn't clear and we're left with little more than speculation. Costa made his way out to school with his weaponry in his backpack. He arrived at school at about 8:40 a.m. When he made his way inside, he immediately pulled one of the guns out of his backpack and held it up. The school security guard put himself in front of Costa to stop him, but Costa fired. The security guard collapsed to the ground, leaving him to continue further into the school. In the hallway were two girls acting as hall monitors. Walking towards the classroom, Costa pulled up his gun and fired at the two girls as well. With them both out of the way, he reloaded his gun as he prepared to enter into his classroom. Costa then entered into his classroom. He fired at the teacher as students began to duck under their desks. While many students in the school had escaped through a back door, the students in the classroom were left with little more to do than hide and pray. Costa shot the history teacher in the classroom before firing off rounds at numerous other children. He came to kill 6 girls, 1 boy, and wound 5 others. He then left the classroom and quickly ran out into the hallway. He exited the school and made his way out to the courtyard. That was when he would do something truly unexpected. Costa released the magazine from his gun and dropped it onto the ground while walking down the steps. He then pulled out his phone and called the police himself. On the phone with the police, he told them that he had been taken over by fear and panic and that his breathing felt funny. He told them that it was the right thing to do to call the police and tell them what he had done. He said that he was a psychopath and that he just needed to calm down. In the end, his entire attack had lasted only 2 minutes. In that time, he had fired 52 shots in total. Costa stood around in the courtyard until the police made their way out. They quickly threw him into handcuffs upon their arrival. When they asked him why he had just done such a thing, he responded with, "I shot because I am a psychopath." In his young age, it seems that Costa thought that the term psychopath just meant someone who was crazy in general. With the writing he had carved into his door, it seems that he was confusing psychopathy with schizophrenia. As a result, he wasn't very consistent in what he was trying to portray. The police placed a coat over his head and let him outside of the school. Many parents had already gathered outside, waiting to hear whether their kids had lived or died. The entire street was shut down and blocked off as the police quickly began their investigation. The media quickly gathered around the school, where they would begin to hear about what had happened inside. One of the teachers spoke of the bravery of the school security guard, Dragan Valhovic, saying, "He wanted to prevent the tragedy and he was the first victim." By the time it was all over, 10 people had died. 8 of them were girls, 2 of which were the hall monitors. 1 of them was a boy, and 1 was the security guard himself. Their names were 11-year-olds Bojana Asovic and Anna Bojovic, 12-year-old Katarina Martinovic, 13-year-olds Mara Angelkovic, Emma Kobielski, and Sofia Nejic. The 14-year-olds were Angelina Achimovic, Andrea Kicic, and Adriana Dukic. And of course there was the 53-year-old security guard Dragan Valhovic. In the end, few of those who died were on his hit list. The only fatalities from his list were the 3 14-year-olds, Angelina, Adrija, and Adriana, and one of the 13-year-olds, Mara Angelkovic. This is out of 16 names total. 6 other students and the teacher had also been injured. 2 of the boys and 1 of the girls were taken to the University Children's Clinic in Belgrade. Both of the boys had been shot several times in their legs. The girl had been shot in the head and had to undergo emergency surgery. Another boy, who was wounded in the spine, was transferred to a hospital in Chicago in the US to get surgery a little later. Quickly after the shooting occurred, a blood drive was opened at a nearby institute. Many people came to contribute. The teacher that had been injured, 52-year-old history teacher Tatiana Stevanovic, had been shot 3 times and had to undergo multiple surgeries at the Clinical Center of Serbia. In the end, she was left unable to walk or use her left arm. It wasn't too long before the police released Costa's name to the media, although given his age, there wasn't much else that they could say about him. The prosecutor's office gave the details that he was 13 years old and in the 7th grade, but that was about it. Still, it wasn't long before pictures of him from his yearbook were posted all over the news. His eyes were censored at first, but the full picture without the censorship leaked shortly after. In the coming weeks and months, a good number of different photos of Costa began to spread on social media. His identity certainly didn't remain a secret for long. There was an even bigger problem with Costa's age, though. Thanks to a law called the Juvenile Criminal Offenders and Criminal Protection of Juveniles Act, children in Serbia don't reach the age of criminal responsibility until they were 14 years old. That meant that, because Costa was born in June, he was only a mere month too early to meet that age. No matter what happened or how the case developed, the prosecutors could not charge him with any crime whatsoever. Given that, it appeared that Costa was most likely going to walk free. While he would be open to a very open and shut case of expulsion from the school, it didn't seem like he was going to face many other repercussions, if any. Instead, his case was referred to the Center for Social Work. It was up for the social workers to decide what action, if any, would be taken moving forward. The possibilities were few, with talks of moving him to a different family or placing him into an inpatient facility for his mental health being commonly discussed. After a short while, it was decided that Costa would be taken to a psychiatric hospital in Belgrade, the Child and Adolescent Neurology and Psychiatry Clinic. He was given a drug test and found not to be under the influences of any substances whatsoever. With that, it was up to the hospital staff, police, and the Serbian government to decide where to go next. Very quickly after the news of Costa's attack spread, rumors began to circulate that he had been heavily bullied by the classmates he had killed. Little did anyone know, he had actually only transferred to his new class very recently, and it was reported that he didn't really interact with anyone. Still, many people online, especially younger people, took to his defense. He saw an unusually enormous amount of support on platforms with younger users like TikTok, with many of them saying that the supposed bullies had probably deserved it. The president of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, gave a public address shortly after the shooting. He said that he intended to propose new gun measurements to the government. Given the backlash about Costa not having been charged with a crime, he said that he would also work to lower the age of criminal responsibility from 14 to 12. The government began adopting the new policy about guns within a day. It was announced that current gun permits would be temporarily suspended, that new permits would require more psychological testing, and that 1,200 police officers would be hired to patrol near schools. The education minister at the time, Branko Ružić, announced that the country would take part in 3 days of mourning starting on May 5th. Classes would be suspended as well. The Institute of Health even put a few numbers in place where kids could inquire about counseling or support. However, this same education minister would prove to become very controversial when he quickly blamed the attack on, quote, the cancerous, pernicious influence of the internet, video games, so-called Western values. His sentiment wasn't all too uncommon for the country, with the pro-Russian sentiment and anti-Western language having grown in intensity in recent years. Still, many were quick to point out that Russia is no stranger to school shootings and stabbings, and even hosts a good number of hate groups and gore websites online. To make things even worse, the education minister was caught in a photo, posing with a gun and an attractive woman trying to look all cool and badass while at the same time denouncing guns to the public. More controversy came about when many women online began to label the attack as a misogynistic mass shooting. This was based on nothing more than the fact that most of the fatalities were girls, and ignored that many of the boys in the class were also shot multiple times and only survived out of pure luck. Many of the names actually on Costa's hit list were also boys, with the list being split pretty evenly. Later, it was rumored that he was part of some hate groups online, but it wasn't proven. Rumors also began to spread at the school that a girl had turned Costa down for being too nice, but those claims were also hearsay. Regardless, Costa was labeled as an incel, despite being very young and there being no evidence to support that claim. With the police unable to charge Costa, they began to close in on his parents. His father, Vladimir, was questioned at a hearing on May 5th at the prosecutor's office. He denied having committed any sort of crime in relation to the shooting. Still, the prosecutor opted to keep him in custody for the time being. They said that he had trained his son for the attack, saying that teaching him how to use a gun when he was younger than 10 was inappropriate for his age. They said that if his son was able to simply brute force his way into the gun safe, then they must not have been secured that well. The court approved his detention, and it was said that he would be charged with a crime called grave acts against public security. Around that time, Costa's phone was sent in to forensics to see if they could gain any knowledge from it. Costa asked the staff at the psychiatric clinic to give him a new phone so he could keep talking to his friends online. It seemed that he had fully realized that he likely wasn't going to face punishment and didn't seem to care about what he had done. Just in the week after the attack, Costa inspired a lot of kids his age to do the same thing, or at least threaten to do the same thing. This led to a whole slew of new arrests. On May 5th, another 13-year-old from Krushevats posted on Instagram that he would, quote, repeat this massacre on Friday. The next day, 6 arrests were made. Another young girl filmed a video for TikTok where she showed support for Costa and made fun of the victims. Another 3 boys were arrested after posting pictures of weapons that they said they would be taking to school. Another 17-year-old was arrested after making vague threats that more than 30 people would die in his city. Another 22-year-old was arrested after saying that a similar attack would take place in a different city. The day after that, on the 7th, another man was arrested after saying that he would commit a copycat crime, and one day later on the 8th, an 18-year-old posted a drawing of his classroom with bloody figures lying near their desks as one figure held a handgun. Meanwhile, Costa's mother was holding out hope that the hospital wouldn't continue to house her son much longer. The institution said that holding him in the facility would be subject to periodic revision, meaning that they would hold a review on what to do with him every once in a while. His mother excitedly agreed to this decision, granting permission immediately. The same day, the Serbian Ministry of Internal Affairs offered a 1-month amnesty for surrendering illegal or unregistered weapons and ammunition, meaning that citizens would be allowed to hand over their firearms with no questions asked. After a while, it was shown to be a success. 78,302 guns and well over 4 million rounds of ammunition were handed over. Still, the arrests weren't slowing down. The next day on the 9th, the police arrested another boy who was planning to carry out a similar attack with a bomb. It was actually the FBI who found him and notified the police in Serbia about him. Another boy was arrested when he spread the false information that Costa had been released and was on his way to kill half the survivors at his school. 2 more minors were arrested for posting pictures of themselves holding guns on social media with ominous captions. Finally, 1 more was taken in for showing a strong amount of support for Costa online and bad-mouthing the school. That was only the 9th, though. The next day on the 10th, there would be even more. An 18-year-old was arrested for saying he would be taking an automatic rifle to his own school, and a 15-year-old was arrested after making threats of shooting his classmates. Many of the parents at Costa's school had banded together to demand that classes be ended for the school year. However, that same month, the school actually reopened and continued holding classes. This was with at least 6 police officers present on campus at all times, but after some backlash, all of the students were sent to a different local elementary school in the afternoons. In the coming weeks, the arrests would only continue. The country's disenfranchised youth had gone crazy in support for Costa and what he had done. On May 15th, 2 14-year-old girls were arrested. One threatened her classmates and showed support for Costa on social media, and another had actually acted on her threats, cutting her classmate with a knife before being stopped. Another school had to be completely evacuated when a still unknown person threatened to shoot it up. Then, in June, a man left a baseball cap with a faked bullet inside of it in front of Costa's school, believed to have been a vague threat. By the time the chaos had largely subsided, criminal charges were filed against 82 different students for their threats and actions. 29 of them faced further legal action. The sad thing is, there were many more who were spared, as, just like Costa, they weren't quite 14 and the new policies hadn't taken effect. The prosecutor's office had been collecting evidence against Costa's mother as well as his father by this point. They had suspected that, at the least, she was guilty of neglect. They asked her to testify on her son's physical and mental well-being, his upbringing, their family dynamics, and his interactions with kids his age. She said that she never observed anything abnormal and refused to elaborate. All she would say was that he seemed sluggish while getting ready that day, but otherwise nothing was out of the ordinary. She said that she had figured that Costa was injured in the attack, not that he was the perpetrator. In addition to the parents, the prosecutor's office kicked off an investigation into the Partisan Practical Shooting Club, the shooting range where Costa had practiced. The club's president insisted that Costa had never practiced there. He said that he joined his father, but he had never fired a gun himself. The prosecutor's office didn't really believe him, and there are photos of him firing the gun at what appears to be that gun range. Eventually, Costa's nanny came to be questioned by the police, although she wasn't suspected of anything. She told them everything she knew about his upbringing, family life, and habits. The school psychologist was similarly brought in and asked the same questions. Then, many more family members were brought in as well to tell their side of the story. In June, it was determined by talking to Costa himself, his schoolmates, his family, and various others that he hadn't actually been bullied in his school. All that conclusion did was make the motive in the case even more unclear. Costa still wouldn't own up to anything aside from the fact that he had heard about mass murder in a movie and thought it would be interesting to do himself. Nevertheless, he was held on 24-hour police surveillance and was held in an area of the hospital where escape would be nearly impossible. The government of Serbia finally decided to end the school year early. If the students wanted to attend school until the end of the year on the 20th, they would be allowed to, but most of the classes they would take would be in the form of prep classes or classes about developing emotional skills. Parents and teachers were shocked as the decision came more than a month after the shooting took place and there was no announcement made in advance. It just happened one morning. The teachers weren't even told how to grade the schoolwork just to make it happen. The decision was called late, hasty, performative, and embarrassing. All this time, Costa's dad was still being held in detention. When it came time to be freed, his detention had been extended, twice in June alone. By the time July came around, it was further extended for 3 more months. The High Court in Belgrade also forbid the family from getting rid of any of their property. It was found that they owned property in several different cities in total. Eventually, Costa's mother was detained as well and put into custody herself. This was because she was caught trying to flee the country with her daughter. While she did say they were only going on a short vacation as a recommendation from a therapist, this was heavily doubted. Costa's father's money was transferred to the court until the remainder of his proceedings were finished. In July, the case once again brought massive controversy as, for some reason, Costa's face was plastered all over clothing sold at an online shop based in Morocco. It isn't known why Morocco took a fascination with the young shooter unless they just thought it would make some good money. The site actually advertised the shirt as well. It wasn't hidden by any means. The shirts became somewhat popular and the website even stated that they would ship them to Serbia. This understandably led to a lot of outrage. Later on in July, Costa was questioned again. Many of the victims' family members attended the questioning along with several of the attorneys involved. In total, it lasted for about 4 hours, with Costa participating through video chat from his hospital. He said that he had changed his mind now and regretted the shooting. He said that, if given the chance to go back in time, he wouldn't do it. However, this sense of regret was said to have been spotty at best, as many of his remarks showed no remorse at all. At the end of the questioning, it was said that there was no longer any doubt as to whether or not the guns in the home were stored adequately. They weren't. This likely meant that, while they were stored away, the security wasn't all that tight. The family of one of the victims filed a civil lawsuit against Costa's mother, seeking compensation for their child's death. They then filed lawsuits against Costa's father, the school, and the country in general as well. It wasn't long before Costa, his parents, and the school were found to be liable, although the country was not. Over the months, only more lawsuits came flying at the family and the school. In August alone, 27 claimants banded together on a lawsuit seeking compensation for their own kids as well. In August, Costa's mom put forth a request to resolve an issue of what would happen with her kids' schooling. While asking in regards to her innocent daughter would be understandable, she also put out feelers to see if she might be able to argue that Costa should be taken out of his mental institution so that he could attend school once again. She was told that his only option for now would be online schooling. Surprisingly, it took all the way up until the end of August for the Vladislav Ribnikar Teachers' Council to decide to expel Costa from their school. However, they were told by the Ministry of Education that they wouldn't be allowed to exclude a student from their school. They were told that, if he wished, Costa could continue his schooling at a local elementary school that teaches students who can't continue normal schooling due to health problems. It was later confirmed that Costa would be attending that school, although it wasn't said exactly how it would be done. When September came around, the new school year started as it normally would. The school had done a lot of work renovating the school's interior in order to give the place a fresh image. The exterior and gyms were overhauled as well. 10 cedar trees were planted in pots in front of the school to honor each of the victims. In October, it came time for Costa's father to attend a hearing. The hearing was immediately hit with problems when it was found that the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Belgrade had, for reasons unknown, failed to provide medical expertise, which would be crucial to come to any sort of conclusion. This only resulted in even more delays. Things were quiet until January of 2024, when the history teacher injured in the shooting filed yet another lawsuit against the parents. In the next month, 2 more were filed by the parents of injured students. The trials for them began in May and June of that year. The criminal trial against the parents formally began as well. The many cases against the family, civil and criminal, continued for months. In December of 2024, their first lawsuit against them was settled. Things really grew interesting when Costa, for the first time, was let out of his mental institution, temporarily, to testify against his parents. Costa showed up to court and stood while the parents of the children he murdered watched him from behind glass in the audience. Costa admitted that he had carried out the massacre with his father's 2 guns. He said that he had found them easily as they were stored in a closet. He admitted that he had taken them out and moved them to his room, which went unnoticed for days. He said that his father had also complimented him on his shooting in the past. Many of the other details about what he said about his parents remain unknown, but a few key pieces of information have been made public. For one, Costa blamed his parents for the massacre. When it came to his father, he said, If I didn't have my father's guns, I wouldn't have committed the massacre. The weapons were within my reach. He was even more cold towards his mother. Finally, he admitted as to his motivation for committing the attack on the school in the first place, although it's debatable as to whether or not he was being fully honest. He said that he was motivated to commit the attack by his mother's pressure, her constant demand that he must be the best at anything he ever does. He implied that this had caused him to snap. At the end of December, Costa's parents were convicted on charges relating to failing to secure their firearms. Costa's father, Vladimir, was sentenced to 14.5 years in prison. His mother, Emilyana, was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. When it was determined that the instructor at the firing range had indeed taught Costa how to use a gun, he himself was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in prison. Even after being sentenced to prison, the blows just kept landing. In March of 2025, Costa's family and the school were ordered to pay 68,000 and 111,000 euros to each party involved in the first lawsuit. Then again, in May of 2025, the family were found liable in the lawsuit taken out by the history teacher, ordered to pay out a further 58,000 euros. The third lawsuit hasn't yet reached a conclusion as to how much they will pay, but they were found liable on July 25, 2025. The other lawsuits are still pending, but given the trend, it's highly likely that the parents will lose and have to hand over even more money. While they were pretty wealthy before, it's pretty easy to assume that they will be left financially ruined and unemployable after this is all over. As of the making of this video, Costa's parents are still in prison. Costa himself is still sitting in a mental institution, receiving medical care and counseling instead of any sort of real punishment. It has been rumored that his life in the hospital isn't all too strict and that he's still able to interact with other kids, play on a phone, and enjoy himself. We can assume that his case is still being reviewed periodically and that at some point he will be free. He will likely get his name changed and live a somewhat normal life with no criminal record. That is a lot more than can be said about his victims. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. These days I have opened a merch store. There you can buy yourself some t-shirts, stickers, and all sorts of other stuff if you feel like it. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything ever happens to the channel, or if you just need to get a hold of me, that's the easiest way to do all of that. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get most of the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.